Nellis, the show that takes you on a deep dive into the happenings of the hospitality industry. Now, sometimes there's a focus on culture, and sometimes there's a focus on travel trends, and sometimes there's a focus on passion projects, but it all comes back to the industry. And here we are. We're back at the beautiful WineLair, the private wine club in downtown DC, adjacent to the Ritz-Carlton. So excited to now be doing Industry Night here. Now, for those of you who are new to Industry Night or to me, welcome, and a little bit of background on me. I've been covering the DC food, wine, and hospitality scene for over 20 years through a variety of outlets. Print, TV, online, radio, podcasts, and social. If you live in the DC metro area, then you better be reading the list, areyouonit.com, the online e-zine that tells you everything happening in the DC metro area. We have a calendar just chock full of food and wine events happening all over the city and beyond. Of course, every opening that's happening, every opening that's coming soon, and a whole bunch of promotions that are happening around the area. So if you're thinking Thanksgiving, if you're thinking Christmas, New Year's, all that kind of stuff, we got you covered. Of course, you're tuned in every Sunday on 1500 to Foodie and the Beast, DC's only food and wine variety show with me and my husband, David, 14 years strong. And of course, you follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and sometimes Twitter. No, always Twitter. I just don't know if it will be Twitter forever, at NYCCINELLIS. Okay, so now that we are in the thick of November, it's so exciting because the city is vibrating with so much positive energy. Restaurant, bars, and hotels are busy, and I love it. Of course, I've been out and about, and I just want to mention a couple of the places that I've been to, and you may have seen me skulking about. So, no, it's been a minute since I've been to Rose's Luxury. During the height of the pandemic, we definitely did order in from Rose's at home, and it was, pretty delicious. But I hadn't been to the space in a while, and it's still got that really cool casual vibe. The food and service is still completely on point. But we popped up at the bar because who doesn't want to sit in front of the kitchen? I love dinner and a show. And we ate our way through, some of the old standbys like that Chinese sausage with the lychees. But we also had some of the newbies, which was the steak and eggs. And I gotta be honest with you, there is no reason to have steak anywhere else, like a steakhouse, because their steak is ridiculous. Also, huge shout out to our service. Nam was our server, and he was amazing. I totally read the room when it came to my group. Casual, appropriately chatty, made great suggestions, and totally elevated our experience. So a big shout out and thank you to Nam. I was at Cheesetique, their annual holiday and wine tasting expo. That shop is such a treasure. It's filled with hundreds of cheeses, and I'm like a cheese whore. I love cheese. Stacks and stacks of food-friendly wine and other cheese accoutrements. It's one of my favorite places to go to just kind of walk around. And we just did an industry night there for this event. They had incredible offerings of wine, tastes of caviar and cheeses, and they even savored some champagne. So stay tuned. That's coming up on another episode. And since your girl here is backing out the door to put her tush in the sand at Grand Cos in St. Martin, what I should be doing is running around, crossing every T and dotting every I, and making sure all my work is in good place before I leave. But instead, I was like, screw that. I'm going to the Waldorf Astoria because I was invited in to check out the new spa. And who would say no to that? I mean, seriously. Now, I did refuse to go to that property for basically 6 years because of its previous ownership. But now that it's under new ownership, and it is the Waldorf Astoria, I did allow myself to go in. So the spa is pretty fabulous. Lovely hushed conversations when you walk in, a eucalyptus steam in the well-appointed women's room, the sanctuary area, the place where you kind of hang out before you have your service, has a trickling waterfall and these little pods that you can encase yourself in so nobody can bother you. And the salt room. There's a pink Himalayan salt room. I don't know what it does, but I sat in it for like 20 minutes, and it rushes around pink Himalayan salt, which is supposed to be very healthy for you. And then there's red lights, which is also very good for you. So I hung out in there also before my service. Yes, I got there early. And then I had a wonderful 75-minute, totally luxurious totally indulgent facial, where she really massaged, and product my face. I'm all about lymphatic drainage, and I'm pretty sure after 75 minutes that it happened. So with the holidays in mind, if you're thinking of great gifts or doing something with friends and family, and don't mind spending a little bit of money, I recommend the Waldorf Astoria Spa. So let's get on to today's show. Michelin's 2021 Washington, D.C. Sommelier Award winner. Dun, dun, dun. Bill Jensen. That's who he is. He's also the co-owner and beverage director of Tail of Goat and Reveler's Hour in Adams Morgan. He loves Riesling so much that he's on the steering committee for FLXcursion, which is an internal Riesling Expo in the Finger Lakes, which we're going to get into because y'all know how I feel about that Riesling. At the height of the pandemic lockdown, Bill got creative and launched the widely beloved Tail of Goat Wine School. And I'm quoting him here, but he believes that drinking should be an act of replenishment, renewal, and discovery. And I love that, and we're going to get into it. But before we do, we're going to test him because in with me is Alissa Pelkola. She is the general manager here at the WineLair. So Alissa, I haven't had an opportunity yet to chat with you on air about the WineLair. We had Chef on, we had John on, but tell us a little bit of your role here.
Sure. So I'm the general manager. I really am in charge of making sure members' experiences here are great. We take great pride in taking wonderful care of our members, and we full service, dining and drinking. We also help them buy, locate and purchase rare vintages. And
I was going to ask about that. Do they come to you as a resource to be like, hey, how do I get my hands on this?
Sometimes, absolutely, and other times we're offered lists from estate sales or the private seller sales, and we are able to pass those on to our members as well. So they have the opportunity to purchase back vintages and rare bourbons and scotches and other things. So we pass those opportunities on to our members, and that's one of the benefits of membership.
And what about curation here? So because you have the beautiful cellar where people can locker their wines, but you still offer wine. Because you would think people would come and just drink their own stuff, right?
Well, that does happen a lot, but also, sometimes people come in and, they're with a group of people, it's a business dinner, and maybe they don't want to give them their nice wines. Or maybe sometimes, someone at the table doesn't drink red wine and they have a cellar full of Napa Valley Cab, that they, that doesn't really fit what they're doing. So we do have a full wine list, and we do offer full taste for everyone. And we also put on we do offer wine pairings when we put on events. So we have, a full range of wines that we offer as well.
Okay. And you guys do have some events coming up. Do you want to talk about them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We have actually a number of events coming up for the holiday season. These are available to the public. Tickets are available on Talk. If you'd like to look them up, just WineLair DC on Talk, and you will find a list of everything we have available right now.
Shameless plug, but of course they'll be on the list or youonit.com as well. I mean, seriously. But go ahead.
So we have a rare bourbon tasting with executive bourbon steward Chaz Lum. We have one this Saturday, November 19th, and one Friday, December 16th.
Great.
He has access to very rare collector bourbons that are really hard to get your hands on, and if you ever have this gives you the opportunity to try them without having to shuck out $1,000 or more a bottle to get your hands on them on the secondary market. So if you have interest in bourbon, if you want to try some really interesting bourbons that you probably won't find elsewhere, it's a great chance to do that. And he'll give a whole lot of information about them as well.
I love that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We also have David Hale of Gemini Wine Company coming in. We've done a series of events with him as well. This one is Tuesday, December 6th. He's going to be giving recommendations on holiday hosting and gifting, so wines to serve to different size gatherings if you're hosting a party, and also things that are make wonderful gifts if you are looking to gift wine at the holidays.
Well, I think that's interesting because I do think people try to figure out, like if you're trying to serve a decent wine at your holiday party, do you just get like cases of bottles, or do you go big and get large format bottles? Like what's the smarter way to go?
I mean, I think large formats can be intimidating for some people at home, but I think that's a great fun option.
I also think it's so impressive when you walk around with a big-ass bottle,
Definitely. But I think that he's looking at sort of like, I think his focus is going to be sort of, if you're looking for something special for a more intimate gathering, or if you want to say, impress people, but have something that's affordable for a larger gathering. So something sort of like, trying to fit all occasions,
Cool.
different options. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so you're going to join us at the end of the show,
Mhm.
but in the interim, we're going to give our big Som here a little test. So what do we got going on here?
So we have 2 white wines.
Okay. Well, now we know they're white, so that's a hint.
Yes.
Okay.
2 white wines from different areas. They're not super similar, but just fun things to enjoy while you're chatting. And we also have a little cheese and charcuterie.
Thank
you
you from
enjoy
Chef.
Thank you so much for hosting us.
Yes.
Absolutely, please.
Okay, so while you're pouring the wines, just make sure we know which one is 1 and 2. Bill, move your tush next to me, please.
So the glass on the left is going to be number 1.
Okay, great. I'm going to put this here so I don't forget which one is 1 and which one is 2 because I have no memory left. There we go. Okay, I got 1. Okay, so hey, Bill. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for hosting.
You know what's not in your bio, Bill?
What's
What's
that?
not in your bio is that you too have a podcast.
Well, the bio is on the podcast landing page. So,
Okay.
so at that point, hopefully you know about the podcast. But yes, I have a podcast as well.
I was a guest of it.
Yes, and we're thrilled to have you. That has yet to be posted though. So I
Okay.
like to bank content.
I hear you.
And then
Thank you.
slowly meet it out. But the podcast is called The Universe in a Glass.
Mm-hmm.
And we host friends and trade bottles and talk about the wines that we're drinking and all the stories that come along with them. And we drop new content, new episodes every Wednesday. We are on most major platforms, so Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud.
Okay, Bill. I'm going to let you do your advertisement at the end of the show.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
right now, but I wanted to make sure
All right.
that you did tell people that you had a podcast, and I
Yes.
do want them to find it because it is excellent.
Thank you so much.
So, but let's talk a little bit about you and how you got into the business. Like, not every kid thinks, "Ooh, I can't wait to be old enough where I can swirl and sniff wine and spit it out."
No, it's not like sommeliers come to career day
Right,
and
exactly.
elbow out the firemen that are entertaining kindergartens. No, it's kind of a fundamentally preposterous way to earn a living, and it's not how I ever expected to kind of conduct my professional life. But I kind of crashed out of college in my early 20s and didn't know what to do with myself and landed in the restaurant world. And one of my favorite things about restaurants is, the restaurant industry is a bit of like an artist colony for people who feel out of place in other, kind of lines of work. And it became a home for me. And I had always loved food and came to really adore wine and, want to understand everything about it and how it.
But who was it who sort of piqued your interest first? Did somebody pour you a glass of wine, or was it something about the service style?
It's
you
funny,
were doing?
a lot of wine people have this road to Damascus experience, this bottle that opened their eyes to what wine could be. I think that was more of an unfolding for me. I don't think there was one bottle. I can remember the first time I opened a bottle for a table, though, and that was.
Was that a mistake?
Yeah, no, that was entirely on purpose. So I'd been at the staff training at Two Amy's, which was my first real restaurant job, which is
That's a good place to start.
Iconic, Glover Park Neapolitan pizzeria, and I recommended to this table this glass of I believe it's Aglianico, which is this kind of quintessential Southern Italian red wine from Basilicata. And, I described it for them. They liked the description. I opened it for them. And I can just remember thinking, this doesn't suck. This is a pretty cool way to earn a living.
Right.
And I remember that more than any single bottle that turned me on. I think it's just been, this professional life of falling deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole for the sake of the wines that I adore.
Well, I love that. And then from Two Amy's, did you go to Comey from Two Amy's?
I had other professional lives. So I worked as a political organizer. I worked for the city organizing Green Jobs program, but I was always kind of dabbling. When I needed to pay the bills, I was working at restaurants, and so my next restaurant job was at Comey, and I worked there off and on for about a decade. And
so when you started at Comey, because we went to Comey when Johnny first opened Comey, it still had like the pizza oven in it.
Yeah, well, so yeah, and he offered lunch.
Right.
It was an old Roberta Donna space. It was much more casual.
Radicchio.
Yeah, exactly. It was a more casual joint. And that's how I first experienced it. When I trained there initially, they were still offering a la carte and tasting menu, but once I started, they moved to tasting menu all the time. So my experience of Comey as a server and then ultimately as a manager and then the person pouring wine there was as, more of, I hesitate to call it fine dining, but that's what it was. That's what it became.
Absolutely. No, I think the concept of Comey sort of shared this new way of fine dining, right? That you could have this elevated food and wine experience without, sort of the my pleasure. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, hopefully it wasn't stuffy. That was
right?
that was always the hope in terms of the character service. It was always the hope that people could have fun there, they could feel relaxed there, they could be their true selves there, that they weren't performing the role of people in a particular restaurant context. But all the food was just on point.
Pristine.
And amazing. And the service was just as concerned, with making sure that everything technically was on point, and the wines were elevated and all that other stuff, but that it just felt more approachable for the sake of the just salt of it all.
Well, and I think you now see things like Aaron Silverman, you see these other restaurants now that are sort of the extension of what.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. Like, and I think stateside, especially, people very often they want, fine dining kind of level food and drink, but they don't necessarily always want the trappings that come with it for the sake of, an experience that is, seemingly stuffy. And there are a lot of people doing that really well. And certainly Aaron, in DC, has made a career out of it.
But I also think you and your partners in opening up Tail Up Goat took some of that as well, right? So when it came time for you to open up Tail Up Goat, what was it that you wanted first for the restaurant? Like, how would you explain the restaurant to people?
When people asked us what our concept was, which is always like a horrifying word to me in the context of, restaurants.
Well, because it sounds so final.
Yeah,
right? Like
it always sounds like, I don't know. It just sounds, to me, the concept is you have a particular, kind of food you want to cook or whatever, concept just, it sounds, I don't know, alien. It sounds like, you're artificially inflating something. But, for our sake, our concept was to serve the food we wanted to eat, to play the music we wanted to hear, and, serve the drink that we wanted to drink. And we wanted to be...
I'm sure your business partners were like, the money people were like, yeah, we need a little more detail. Fill in the spaces there, Bill.
Yeah. I mean, that would have been mostly Jill, but, I think we were comfortable with that. And we... had come of age and, had strong ideas about what we loved in, this hugely successful environment for the sake of Comey and Little Sarah. So we definitely had the strength of our own convictions and had confidence that people would follow us. And, the restaurant, broadly speaking, is Mediterranean. We wanted it to be a place that was sufficiently neighborhoody that people could be regulars there. But we also wanted it for other folks to occupy, this destination dining.
You have straddled that tough line. I will be honest. I think a lot of restaurants want to be both and have not straddled it, but you really have. Your neighborhood in Adams Morgan, because you are off the beaten path in Adams Morgan. You're like behind the corner. Like you have to find you. People who live in Adams Morgan or DuPont Circle, Mount Pleasant, know you, go to you, they're regulars. But then you have people like me, who lives in Kensington, Maryland, or maybe I'm a bad example because I go eat out all the time. But then you have people who are like, oh, I've heard of Tail Up Goat. I really want to, it's on my list, and people make, it is a destination. Yeah, so I think you're lucky or fortunate to have done that.
Yeah, and they bring their parents in, they celebrate anniversaries and birthdays there. And, I think to have that energy of this consistent presence of people that reflect the character of the neighborhood you're in, coupled with, this energy of people that are out for a celebratory, meal is really special. And it's something that,
Mm-hmm.
I never want to take for granted.
Well, that's a very generous of spirit of you. You should never take that for granted. And lots of people do, which is why they don't succeed. But before we get into how you built your wine program there, let's take a look at glass number 1.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
It's on the left.
Yes, the one on the left, which is hard for me because I don't always remember my right from left. But
So it should be. So I asked before we came into this broadcast if these were testable. So traditionally in a blind tasting context, you would have like a universe of wines that are in play.
Sure. So you have some idea.
Just because you have classic archetypes and then you
Sure.
have not so classic archetypes. So these may or may not be classic archetypes. So I'm going to hedge my bets a little bit there, Nycci. But
Okay. Well, I will say one other time that I did this, and I am bragging, when Mark Culler was still alive.
Yeah.
Mark Culler, had
Absolutely.
like 10,000 bottle wine
Well, his cellar was so
house.
big. Well, his cellar was so big that ultimately opened a restaurant.
To hold all of his wine.
Exactly.
So he had a dinner in his house, and this is before Jose Andres. He was Jose Andres, but he wasn't Jose Andres the way he is today. And Jose cooked for us, and we all had to bring. Oh my God, drink that wine.
No, sorry. So my mom gives me all sorts of shit for this, but this is that's how I taste wine. And the idea is that drawing air in oxygenates the wine, and it makes it more readily available for you for the sake of taste of it all. And I can't turn that off. I even taste like really crappy wedding reception wine that way.
Okay, you just can't help yourself.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Before we discuss the wine, I'll just finish my story. So Jose Andres cooked dinner at Mark's house.
Yeah.
And Mark was like, I want everybody to bring a bottle of wine blind.
Yeah.
And I was like, what do you get for the man who has every wine in the world? Like, I'm going to bring a bottle
That's
of
intimidating.
wine. It was really intimidating. And this is, Mark was still alive. This is years ago. So, I was like, okay, Jose is coming. I'm going to get a Spanish wine. But I was like, maybe I'll get a cava. Like at that time, the kind of cavas you could buy, they were all like $12.99. I'm like, I am not buying a $12.99.
There's bougie cava.
There is now,
Yeah.
but there wasn't then.
Okay.
And so, Sebastian was there.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a whole.
It's a murderer's row. People to present.
Oh
wines
my
to.
God, that was crazy.
What'd you land on? Come on, you didn't.
I landed on some cava, man. I did.
Oh, really?
I did
Okay.
pick a cava. I didn't know what
See,
to do.
in situations like that, sometimes I like to zig where others zag. So, if you're presenting to somebody and they know something backwards and forwards, sometimes I try to do like the blue ocean theory thing and just, present something that's totally different.
Yes, right. Absolutely. Well, it was intimidating. Okay.
What do you think of this? This doesn't seem like a Nycci to me.
It's not.
Yeah. So this is when I taste this, typically, the first thing that you'll evaluate when you smell the wine, and I think people rush past the smell a lot of times when they evaluate a wine.
I can smell the sugar in it. That's how it feels to me. Like it doesn't smell sweet, but.
So there's something like toffeed, honeyed about
Maybe
it on the
that's
nose.
honey.
Yeah. And there's a little mustiness to it as well. So this is a wine that maybe has a little bit of age to it. And when servers are tasting this for the first time, instead of describing a set of smells, whether it's fruit or non-fruit or whatever, initially when they're smelling a wine, I always ask them to talk about the development of the wine. So does it smell youthful, like adolescent, mature, or past its prime? And this is like developing, it's not in its infancy.
No.
It's definitely not past its prime either, but it's somewhere along that, middle arc of the aging curve.
Yes. But it's not heavy wood.
No, so it's it has this like really oxidative streak, which I really dig, and there's something distinctly saline about it.
But there's something about what it leaves on the tongue at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's not oily, but it's got you know what I mean? Like it leaves something on the tongue.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not clean. I guess that's the best way to explain it.
There's a little unctuousness to it, and I think oily is not a bad word for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
No, oily is a great word for that, and honestly, in the context of a white wine, a lot of times that can be evidence of age on the wine. Wines tend to perceptually they drop acid and they gain breadth as they age, and they give you that kind of perception of being more mouth coating, more viscous than they were in their infancy.
Right. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And usually I don't mind it, but this one I don't. There's just like you said, that honeyed flavor. I like something that's just a little crisper, personally. Yeah. Especially since I'm not eating anything, just for something to drink.
Yeah, I'm a weirdo in the sense that I just like the exercise of drinking, and I like to try to wrap my
I
head
didn't
around.
say I wouldn't drink
No,
it.
that's not that. But this whole like piecing together
Yes.
of what the thing is. I could hate this,
Right.
but the act of piecing it together is still,
Fun.
yeah,
It's like a
turns me
puzzle.
on.
Yeah,
totally,
I get it. All right, so we have Tailed Goat, and then you open Reveler's Hour, also
Yeah.
during the pandemic. Now, I want to mention both. I want to talk about what Reveler's Hour
Sure.
is, but then I want to talk about how you develop wine programs
Sure.
for the concepts. Because I think when somebody goes into a restaurant and they open up the wine list, they don't. Not only are stories important to you, narratives are really important to you, but people just don't understand how it's done.
Sure.
So I love a little peek behind the curtain.
Yeah. So I think something that matters to me is that whatever you're doing, you take on a perspective. And when it comes to restaurants, people typically do that for the sake of a particular cuisine.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to try to be all things for, to all people. We are a Mediterranean restaurant. Both places are kind of rooted in, the Southern Mediterranean, Cucina Povera. And, that's part of our being. We will occasionally, adopt individual flavors from other corners of the world and stuff like that. But, that Mediterranean with like mid-Atlantic pantry,
Mm-hmm.
that is our DNA. And I think sometimes that guests expect a wine list to be all things to all people. They want like the wine equivalent of pizza and sushi and like a burger all on the same menu, which is to say that they want...
That's so funny to me.
Well, they want all the wines they're used to. They expect like a constitutional right to, New Zealand Savi B and Napa Cab and all these other things. And I find it much more interesting when people are, daring to narrow a focus and say like, out of the universe of wines, this is what I want you to try on. Now, I think as a beverage person, as like the curator of that experience, it's really important to find within that world bullet points that appeal to a variety of different tastes.
Sure.
So, if you're not going to have Kiwi Savi B and Napa Cab, you should have something that will scratch that itch for people.
Sure.
It doesn't have to be those things, but you should try to find something that will, cater to those preferences.
But I also think it can be intimidating for somebody. Like, listen, I have a B-level understanding of wine. I know what I like. I talk to enough people about wine, but it is intimidating when you walk into a restaurant and it's a short wine list or whatever wine list, and you're like, nope, I don't know any of them. I don't know a single one. So initially, my first concern is like, okay, I don't know anything, which makes me feel stupid, which I know is not the intention. But then, I want to have a conversation with somebody who's going to walk me through it. So my hope is for a restaurant that puts together a list that does stretch the patrons' knowledge, that either the server or the som or whoever's there is like, let's talk. What do you like?
No, that's
How do we
killer.
get into it? You know what I mean?
So, and I think that's something sometimes restaurants miss. So I think, there are a lot of restaurants that want to have a more adventurous, esoteric list, but sometimes they miss the boat because they don't, create a service culture that makes that approachable for their guests.
Right.
And so we spend a ton of time across both restaurants training the staff so that they are in a position to answer questions about, the kind of wines that are unpronounceable or utterly unfamiliar for the mass of our guests. And, I really light up when, these servers that we have spent, so much time and money training up, are just as excited about these individual data points as I am, and that they are, acting as these stewards, as these, Virgils, through the wine underworld for the sake of all of our guests that are, maybe intimidated.
Right.
And we want to blow this all up. Wine is something that has so much baggage when it comes to, sexism and elitism and racism and all this other crap that it shouldn't have,
Right.
It should be, just as approachable and universal for the dimension of taste as anything else on our plate here. And, for a variety of reasons, historically, it hasn't been. And, we want to engage people and celebrate this thing that we love, but do it in a way that, invites people in as opposed to kind of erecting false barriers to entry.
Well, I think that's a real shift for, if you think about dining in the 70s and 80s of what wine was. I'll never forget when my husband and I first started dating, he took me to a French restaurant here that no longer exists, Le Côte d'Or. And my husband didn't know anything about wine. And granted, I was only 26 years old. But the som refused to engage with me. He only wanted to engage with David.
Yeah.
And David was like, talk to the lady. And he was like, okay. I mean, he was so like
mean, that's some-
exhausted by me.
Yeah, it's like old school French shit.
So
Yeah.
totally old school French shit.
I mean, they talk. So Becky Wasserman is a seminal figure in bringing French wine, Burgundy in particular, which would be the Côte d'Or reference to
Right.
America. She
And
talks
I do
about
love my white Burgundy.
yeah. Well, she talks about producers. This is in late 70s, early 80s, who wouldn't let her in the cellar because they were too superstitious.
Why? Like, is it women?
Well, no, there's a set of
menstruation or
spiritual.
something?
Yeah, it can. Yeah. I mean, they exist at the intersection of spiritual forces and science and all these other things, and that's what's so cool about it.
All right, let's try the second one.
All right.
Okay.
So just looking at this wine, something that should you definitely like on camera
Right.
is evident. It's darker in color, so that tells us that likely this has a little more age on it.
Yes.
And it smells mustier, and I already know what this is. And I had a sense that you were going to do this to me. So this smells like a gas station, but in a fun way.
Okay, this does not taste like what it smells
Mhm.
at all.
So that's the fun of this wine, which is definitely a Riesling, but it's never
totally
enough to say.
Riesling.
Well, it's never enough to say that it's Riesling because there are a lot of different styles of Riesling across different corners of the Riesling world. So you got to do better than that and say what part of the Riesling world this is from, and then what's the vintage.
Well,
But
it's not New York.
this is not New York State Riesling. Very good. Yeah. This is most likely German Riesling.
And it's exactly what I don't like about the wine.
Okay, so dish though. What don't you like about it?
So actually, now the other wine looks a lot better to me.
by comparison.
But for this, so it doesn't have a large scent, which totally kind of threw me off. And, when I tasted, the tongue hit sugar right away. So as I explained it to you off air before, mentally, Riesling to me equals sugar.
Yeah.
And it's a mental thing to me. I know there are plenty of Rieslings that don't have the high sugar content, but it has a bad reputation of being a sweet wine.
Yeah.
I know that does not relate to all Rieslings, but that's where my mental break
No,
is
that's okay.
on.
A lot of people share that mental block. Riesling, there is no single Riesling. One of my Somm heroes, Paul Greco, he's at Terroir in New York. He says the greatness of Riesling is in its multiplicity of styles. He says the great failing of Riesling is in its multiplicity of styles. So it's the box of chocolates. No one ever knows what they're going to get.
Right. But Chardonnay doesn't have the same issues to me. Maybe to other people.
It can for the sake of the variable of oak.
Yes, well, because California Chardonnays, I think to appeal to a certain demographic, when as oaky and buttery and as yellow as they could get, because they could do it cheaply, and there was a certain demographic that really went for that. Do you know what I mean? Instead of the clean, Chardonnays out of France. Do you know what I mean? And there are great Chardonnays out of California. Don't get me
my
wrong.
wife will often say I don't like Chardonnay, but I love white Burgundy. The great irony being that white Burgundy is Chardonnay. Yeah, exactly. Right. So for me, I find Riesling hugely fascinating. So when you taste something that's sweet, evolutionarily we're hardwired for that just to be a flag.
Right.
Because we want sweet. Sweet allows us to survive as a species. So that's always going to be the first thing that triggers you. And so that's natural, that's biological. What I dig about Riesling is this sense of balance. So it's this tension to the wine. So it's not just sweet; it's also insanely acid driven, and
I have to taste it.
It's the sweet. It's the sweet tart. It's the interplay of those two variables that cinches it, and that makes this great. And then particularly the food can be super fun, I don't know, the soft cheese there.
Yeah.
This be banging, I promise.
Right.
And the other thing about Riesling that's super cool, to my mind, is very expressive. So we said diesel, petrol, kind of gassy. Let's take this one. There's a really poetic word called petrichor. Petrichor is the smell of pavement after it rains.
I have never heard that word, but
great
now
word.
I am filing that into my Rolodex.
Great word.
Okay.
But then there's something like honeyed, and this wine smells kind of funky, and you get all of that. What's it called, TDN, but on the nose. But then on the palate, it becomes something else entirely, and you get this poached pear, honeyed exoticism about it that is very different. And I love that tension and that disjuncture between, on the one hand, the smell, and on the one hand, the taste. Now, this would be during pandemic, I'd bring wine home to my wife on Fridays because we had we weren't doing as much in service, and it was amazing. It was awesome. Not working service and actually spending nights with your wife was the fucking best.
Right.
But I would bring stuff like this home, and she would like try it and say, yeah, this is good, but this is not a Friday night wine, you know? Because it's not just easy and refreshing, and you can't like throw it back the same way. This is a little cerebral, and you know, it's something kind of you pour over and dissect, and that's part of the appeal of it. But you know, you can see that like the wine nerd in me gets really excited about it too.
I can see that you're very excited about it.
Well, because to me, it's just like such a pure and great thing. And the other thing it blows up is this idea that only red wine is age-worthy. So I think a lot of consumers think that, you know, the greatest, you know, age-worthy wines in the world are from red grapes, and that couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, what about Chardonnays and Chablis?
You're absolutely right.
Those are aged, right?
They age beautifully.
Right?
Yeah. But Riesling ages even more beautifully than those wines. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I'm gonna just say one more thing about Riesling, and then I'm gonna ask you a couple more questions, and then we'll bring Alissa in about 10 minutes. So, okay. So to me, with Riesling, I know you guys love it, and I appreciate your explanation and your love of it. Like it's exciting, but as you know, so many people. If I say to a somm, "I'm not hot for the Riesling," they're like, "Oh, I got one for you." Instead of just being like, okay, what else can we bring you?
Yeah.
You know, it's not just like it's happened to me once or twice or 3 times. I mean, actually, since I gave accolades to Aaron Silverman earlier, one time when I was at Pineapple and Pearls, his very expensive fine dining restaurant, I was with 2 other people, and one of them also does not love Riesling. And he said, anything that I should know before we start your service? And we were like, yeah, we don't like Riesling. And he didn't serve us 1 Riesling, he served us 2.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude.
So I will say, Nycci, I'm a little guilty of that. And you have to appreciate here, you know, sommeliers are kind of like evangelists. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, Riesling's a bit of a religion for those of us that love wine. And sometimes you can't help but evangelizing. You are 100% right, you know. And I think sometimes people in my position forget that. Mm-hmm. You know, at the end of the day, we are curating an experience, but it's not our experience. It is your experience.
Right. And, so I'm totally cool if you're like, hey, I'm going to give you this. I want you to taste this just to open up your mind. But, you know, anyway.
And but the slippery slope we fall into is, you know, for the sake of, you know, trying to force something, you can make the guest feel belittled for the sake of not appreciating it. Right. And that's the last thing in the world.
We're just not hearing it.
Yeah, exactly. That's the last thing in the world we should be about. You know, at the end of the day, you like what you like, and you should feel, you know, every bit as empowered in that as, you know, we feel to like Riesling. Yeah, there's nothing inherently, you know, wrong, good or bad. Yeah, about Riesling as such. It's as arbitrary as any other dimension of taste is.
Okay, I want to go in a totally different direction.
Yeah.
Because the way you run both your restaurants is sort of going to be the way all restaurants have to run shortly. Yes. So can we talk about how you guys came up with service fees and charges and what? So now Tale of Goat is tasting menu only, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Reveler's
except
hours
for, it should be said at the bar. People can do an a la carte thing at Tale of Goat.
Okay, but Reveler hours did not. But how did you come up with, because you guys do a service charge.
Across both restaurants.
Right, and you have a program for your employees that is very, giving and caring. You take the employees into very different than the restaurant industry has in the past. So can we talk about the programs you've set up and how it gets affected?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been important to us to take care of the people that work for us. And, you know, as a small business owner, you know, you're creating this, you know, kind of self-contained universe. And if you don't take care of your employees, they're not in a position to take care of anyone else. Mm-hmm. So we've always offered health insurance. In pre-pandemic world, we paid for half of it. In a post-pandemic world, we pay for all of it.
Wow. I mean, I want to stop you so that people who are listening, who are not in the industry, understand that that's not normal in the restaurant industry.
Yeah, and I think that's deeply sad. And I think I lament the fact that people don't treat the restaurant industry with the same level of professionalism as they do any other business. Yeah, right. And you know, we have always tried to treat it as a career. Now, people switch careers a lot, you know, but it doesn't mean that, you know, when you're in it, you know, it shouldn't be the thing that you're most deeply invested in. Mm-hmm. We had a tip wage model prior to pandemic, and when pandemic hit, when we reopened, we couldn't ask people to come back and not pay their healthcare in full, given what we were asking, and
Right.
the only way that made sense for us at the time was a different model, which is kind of like a one fair wage model, and that's something that the industry is grasping with, is wrestling with rather, and we talked about that on my podcast, and it is really hard, and I appreciate both sides of the argument for and against a tip wage model.
But I think the question the layperson has, who doesn't understand the language and doesn't understand the math of the business.
I think the bitch of it is it's such a complicated system, and I think a lot of people don't really understand how and why it came into being and how it affects people on the ground. Right,
exactly. So my question is how do you, so no tipping, they can't tip?
People can add.
And what does it say on the check? And what does it say on the menu?
So on the check, people get a bill for their food, and then there's a separate line item for the service fee.
And how much is the fee?
22%.
22%.
And we explain on the menu and language that we dissected what the service fee goes toward. And I think consumers should understand that legally, that's not money we're pocketing. For operators, that is money that's going directly to the staff.
But all staff, front of house, back of the house?
Well, what's important about that is in a tipped wage model, the tips can only be distributed to front of the house personnel. So tips can only be distributed to servers, which creates this huge inequality between back and front of house.
Because it ignores how a restaurant runs.
Exactly. And
it makes it seem like that the servers are the only ones who aren't making a proper wage when you have the back of the house.
It makes it seem like the face of the restaurant, is the only worthwhile creature. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The amazing thing about a service fee is that legally, we are then allowed to distribute that across the pool of all hourly employees. So legally, that money can't go to salaried employees, and legally, no tips can go to owners. We're not allowed to touch any of that. But tips are then distributed to everybody evenly if people decide to add on top.
On top of the tip.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, great. So it's a 22% service charge, and then you can add tip on top. But it pays for.
But I think a lot of consumers imagine that operators are pocketing this 22% service charge, or they're lining.
Because I think there's people saying.
Yeah, they're lining their pockets and laughing all the way to the bank, and that could not be further from the truth. I'm not saying that there aren't bad eggs, and
there are bad eggs, and the bad eggs, and listen,
exactly.
and bad eggs get the press, right? So we all know of restaurateurs who didn't pay people's taxes.
Totally.
We all know those stories.
But that exists across all industries.
Of course it does. Exactly.
I mean, I think there has historically been more room for malfeasance in the restaurant industry because a lot of that money flows under the table, and but I think. A one kind of fair wage model is an important moment for our industry, an important move toward professionalization of the industry, and also creating a universe in which employers are better equipped to offer the kind of benefits that staff enjoys across other industries.
So the only question I have to you with that is, one of the things you hear from some servers is, when it came to Initiative 82 specifically, was that if they don't get tips, they're not going to make the kind of money they were making.
That's 100% true.
Okay.
That is totally true. They will make less money. It is a reorientation of the market, and it is a reallocation of wages from servers to other people in different support roles. I think that's a necessary adjustment. And I can't argue. With that point. That said, it does give servers regularization of wages that they don't enjoy otherwise. So if they have a slow month, they get paid the same wage.
No matter what.
Exactly.
And most of them are getting healthcare, like you said. And can now get either paid sick days or paid vacation days or things of that nature. So more the structure of the normal corporate world, it's sort of doing that to the restaurant industry.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, in a really important way. And I think people sleep on the extent to which the notion of tipping itself is a fundamentally racist outgrowth of, the Civil War, and it came to this country, and people initially resisted because it was a legacy of a class system in Europe, and instituting a tipped wage system here kind of perpetuated that class system, but it was inherently, built upon race as opposed to class. And, I don't want to say that, people's hearts are in the wrong place if they want to perpetuate the tipped wage system, but the history of it is really problematic. And I think as operators and as an industry, it's an important moment for us to try to make something different out of this moment and try to make something better. And I think standardizing wages for people in the front and the back of the house and doing it in a more equitable way, in a more consistent way, will ultimately make for a better industry. Now, it might mean that there are fewer places like our restaurant. It might mean that there are more QR codes and stuff like that. I have no doubt that will happen, but I think people will be forced to
catch up.
Yeah, think more fully about how they are, compensating people, and think more fully about what kinds of opportunities they're offering people, as a part of that. And I think that's something that we haven't done well as an industry historically.
No, listen, during the beginning of the pandemic, when people were really scared, some of the biggest leaders, Danny Myers, Tom Colicchio's, and the ones with the loudest voices are the biggest platforms. We're like, we have to change the system. We have to change the system. And there was so much chatter about it, but then nobody was doing it. Everybody was chasing their tail.
It's really hard. This is where it's fascinating too, because like both Colicchio and
Myers.
Yeah, they tried and then they walked it back. And I sympathize with that, because on the ground, it can be hard to make, the P&L, the math add up.
Yeah.
We feel that as operators, and you have to be like really careful about how you distribute hours and stuff like that in a way that you don't if you're not paying people anything and they're relying on tips.
Right.
So I feel that. I think that though, if the enforcement, or if the guideline is coming from a local government or a state government or whatever, it regularizes the standard, and it creates an even playing field for the sake of restaurants.
Then it's more like it's like when we talked about people wearing masks.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's the law. It
Yeah.
didn't matter where a restaurant fell on it except for one thing.
Yeah, and honestly, DC's in a really interesting position, because we're regionally in this 3 different jurisdictional kind of like miasma, and there was and is some fear for the sake of DC restaurateurs that people, our servers will leave and go to the burbs.
But that's the same thing when they were doing the smoking.
Totally.
I'll never forget Lynn Bro being like, they're just not going to come to the city. They'll just stay in their suburbs. And I was like, will they? And of course they didn't. It didn't. It's always a shift. Change is hard.
Yeah,
and
100%.
People need to adapt.
I think the other thing too for us is that we always try to tell our staff that there are easier places to work. You could probably make, more coin elsewhere. Not a lot. We pay, fair wages, but our hope is that we treat people well, and you will learn here. You will, you have room to grow here, and we will invest in you. And I think that's, how we should be operating as businesses.
Totally agree with you. All right. Alyssa's going to come over. Okay, Bill. So. Let's start with wine number 1.
So wine number 1 is fascinating to me. It has this oxidative streak. It has a richness to it that I find hugely fascinating. It's almost Burgundian, but to me it reads more like Rioja Blanco. So it has this like pine nutty salinity that I associate with Viura. Which is, I think,
it does have a Madeira kind of
salinity thing. Yeah.
At the end of
and
it,
and should be said that I'm probably totally wrong for the sake of this, but
you're covering your ass.
That's where my head went. So if I was making a final guess, I would say this is 2017 Rioja Blanco.
Okay,
very close. This is a
come close.
I know that wine. Yes. Yeah. That is Rioja Blanco.
It is Rioja Blanco, but it is done
with
in
sherry.
a traditional style that has a little muslin and sherry.
Yeah.
So,
great. So I sell this wine though, so it's kind of not fair.
Okay, but that's okay.
It's a great choice. I love this one.
Yay! All right. Second one.
This is definitely Riesling. The question is where and when. So the when part is the most interesting. How old do you think this is?
I mean, you're asking the wrong person. I don't know. I have no idea.
So it's not so musty that it's old as fuck. I mean, this is like, mature but not past its prime.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say this is like somewhere in the 2008, 2012 range.
Okay.
But that could be overstating it because it probably tastes a little more developed than it was. I think it's Riesling Spätlese. So Spätlese is a designation for the sweetness of the Riesling.
Okay.
This is German. The question is, where in Germany is it from?
Mm-hmm.
It's a little richer than I'd expect of Mosel Valley Riesling, so I'm going to put it in like the Rheinhessen or something, but I could be totally wrong.
So this is 2014 Rheingau.
Rheingau, damn it.
Although this is a
This is
a Grosslager. It is from a
There's RS here.
It is a Grand Cru vineyard. It's 13% alcohol.
Oh,
so yeah, so it's not technically, they didn't at least rate it as a Spätlese, but it's definitely what the fruit hung in there for a long time.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's showing really well.
Great.
Thank you so much for sharing this.
All right, thanks, Alyssa. That was so much fun. Okay.
For the sake of your listeners, the Rheingau is essentially adjacent to the Rheinhessen. The Rheingau is the mythical birthplace of Riesling.
Oh,
so it makes sense that,
Excellent. All right, well, that was so much fun.
Yeah,
okay,
thank you.
So tell everybody where they can find you, please. Both your establishments, where to find you on Instagram, and your podcast.
Thank you so much. So physically, I can't promise I'll be there, but there'll be wines that I selected, and I can't speak highly enough of the people that I work with. So we are at Tail of Goat, which is in Adams Morgan. We are on Lanier, which is a lovely side street, as you said, but our address physically is 1827 Adams Mill. And then Reveler's Hour is on Columbia Road across the street from the Lion Hotel, 1827 Columbia Road. Tail of Goat's a little kind of fancier for the sake of a tasting menu. Reveler's is wine/pasta bar. I'm the worst millennial in the world. I don't have the gram, but the restaurants do. It's Tail of Goat, at Reveler's Hour. And then I have a podcast. It's called The Universe in a Glass. On Instagram, we are at Universe in a Glass.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Bill. Thanks for joining me. And thank you, too, for joining me today. Oh, my God, it just got darker in here. This is Nycci Nellis for Industry Night. I'm going to be off air for a week because I am going to St. Martin, but follow me at NYCCINELLIS for all of my fun travels, all my fun food, and all the fun things that are happening in my life. Of course, you're still going to go to thelistareyouwantit.com, the online e-zine that tells you about absolutely everything happening in the DC metro area. And there are more winter activations and events happening than you can possibly imagine. Igloos to sit in, chalets to dine in, ice rinks, and etc. It is all happening all around the DC metro area. And tune in to Foodie and the Beast every Sunday at 11 a.m. on 1500 a.m. or click on the link, of course, and you can always hear us any time of day. I want to thank the WineLair for hosting us today. I want to thank Bill for joining me. And I want to do what I do at the end of every show is remind everybody to take their kindness pills, especially with the holiday season coming up. Please remember that your servers are doing the best they can. They do not want you to have a bad time. They want you to have a good time. And staffing shortages are real. Oh, one last reminder, DC Cocktail Week right after Thanksgiving. You don't want to miss it. Like over 35 area restaurants are doing fabulous cocktails with little bites. It's all put on by the Restaurant Association of Metropolitan Washington. So don't forget that as well. Be safe out there and have a delicious week.
Produced by Heartcast Media.